What's up, guys? Welcome to the Way of the Wise YouTube. If you have yet to subscribe to the channel, click that subscribe button because we're giving a bunch of content away. And I'm excited for this. It's been a while. I was traveling to Greece and really just blessed by the experience. But I'll go into a bit on the logic of hell. I think out of all of the doctrines that we experience and we hear about in the church and we hear about in Christianity, we typically think of hell as probably, in terms of its formidability on offensiveness, the highest. And I think, and just to share a little bit of my own story, I was raised honestly in an environment where that was something that you just don't really want to talk about. I was raised within my upbringing, in my own family. My mom in particular, I love her, but that was something that, we didn't really talk about. And it was something that's like, it was a little bit liberal in theology where it's like, you don't want to damn people to hell or whatever. It was just something that you were just kind of a little bit finicky about. And that was just, honestly, it was very normal in New York culture and very typical in places like New York and Los Angeles, and honestly within the general population of much of modern evangelicalism. You don't really hear sermon series on hell. We don't really like talking about it. It's too offensive and it's just mean, and what about our homosexual friends and all this stuff. And so I never really got it, and I remember actually, like, in the early days of my early walk with Christ, I was kind of liberal in my theology. I had actually ended up kind of adopting many universalistic ideas. I couldn't believe that God would do such a thing. And it was honestly really difficult for me to accept the idea of hell and the idea of a loving God sending people to hell, which is what you could be. How could a loving God send people to hell? And so, but more and more in my own process, interestingly enough, in my journey and in my own process and discovery and reading and research, it was actually in research in human psychology that I began to adopt a more honest and brutally honest view of human nature that made me more understanding of the logic of hell, the reasonableness and the rationality of hell. And so I'm going to go into that in this video, go into a little bit of some reasons why I think it actually is logical, some biblical, but some general philosophical, logical explanations for hell. I think clearly the Bible does talk about it. And so, but I want to present an angle that maybe has not been the case. And I think when we think about hell, we think about it is a place of lamenting. When we think about hell, we think of it as a place of mourning and people are really sorry for what they did. God, please save me. And they're burning in hell and they're just like really sorry for what they did and really contrite and really repentant, and they just cannot have a way out. I don't actually think that that's how it goes. And here's the reasons why. There's a particular phrase that Jesus uses in all of the Gospels that is probably one of the top descriptors of, and his own descriptions of hell. And the phrase is weeping and gnashing of teeth. We see it here in one of the verses in Matthew 25, where he's talking about the parable of the talents. And in that, there's the wicked servant, but his Lord answered and said to him, "You wicked and lazy servant, you knew that I reap what I have sown, that I reap what I have not sown, and gather where I have not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited the money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has 10 talents." Mind you, this is hysterical because this particular, I did an old YouTube video about Christianity and communism, and this is a very problematic verse because you would think that there would be perfect equality amongst the talents. There isn't, and he actually ends up giving the talent to the person with the highest amount of talents, not the one with the lesser, to make it more equal and fair. That's another totally side tangent. You can totally watch that video if you wanted to. So, but then he goes on and says, "For everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have abundance. From him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the unprofitable servant into the outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, again, this phrase, weeping and gnashing of teeth, is usually understood to be a phrase that depicts this place of deep remorse and contrition with individuals who are so sorry for what they have done. But I don't think that's the case, and here's the reason why. Is when you actually go into an understanding in terms of scholarship and how they understand this particular phrase, there is the meaning of gnashing of teeth is not necessary. It's very clear that it has a connotation of rage and anger. We think of weeping and gnashing of teeth as predominantly a place of anguish. And while it is a place of deep wrath. It is not a place of contrition. It is a place of indignation. Hell, and this is something that in my own contemplation and study and research, I remember there was a phrase that kind of hit me. And maybe whether this is perfectly theologically true, I'm just going to say it, just be honest. It might be completely, obviously when we're talking about metaphysical realities and things that we don't see, we don't perfectly depict it because we're talking about unseen realities and we're using the limitations and constraints of language. And we're talking about things that are high, that have existed before English. So, anyways, I remember when contemplating like hell and thinking about it and meditating upon it, I remember a phrase came to my mind, and the phrase was, "The flames of hell are stoked by the rage and wrath of sinners." And what I took that to mean is that health, not talking about health today. Hell is not a place of deep, remorseful, contrite hearts and a place of deep contrition and repentance. It is a place of deep, wrathful indignation towards God. These people, the people who, in fact, experience hell, they may not want hell, but they would prefer hell more than they would prefer God. Think about that. It's a thought that, again, my hope, my goal today in this video is to hopefully create a clear and actually a logical understanding and explanation of hell and the reasonableness behind it. Hell is not a place of contrite hearts, of remorseful hearts, of people who would turn their ways if they could. Hell is a place of deep indignation, and the flames of hell are, in fact, they are stoked by the wrath and indignation and rage of those who abide in hell. C.S. Lewis said that hell is locked from the inside out. We have this, this perception that hell is a state of consciousness. And I think we get that maybe from the New Age space. I think it's both. I think the kind of locality of hell, if that's a proper word, actually, locality actually is the word, that the location of hell, the placement of hell is fundamentally attracted to the very personality of hell. And the personality of hell, the internal state of consciousness that is hellish, the internal gulag of your heart that is full of wrath and evil and indignation towards God, the natural repercussions of that is a life of joyful separation from God. It is a delightful, a sort of twisted delight and insanity, a delight to not be with God. And we see that today. We see within, we couldn't possibly say that, why would we ever go on and choose hell over God? But we see that today. We see major rap songs, and we kind of see the collective psyche create an honorarium, a sort of honor, very honorific towards rappers and artists who will make songs around the loveliness of hell and the loveliness of having a life that is not ruled and run by God, but you are God, and you are the one who rules your life, and thank God for hell. We see that today, guys. We see that today. Mind you. So this is not something that I'm just philosophizing and just saying mumbo jumbo. We see this within the collective psyche amongst rappers and artists and Hollywood and so on and so forth, and plenty of people celebrating and honoring and worshiping to these songs and adoring the idea of the loveliness of abandonment of God. It's not that God has abandoned us, we've abandoned him. And we have delighted to do so, and we have had an indignation to do it. It is not a place of contrition. It is not a place of humility. It is, in fact, a place of hatred. It is fueled by the hatred of man. And when we actually look at it, you actually go into the, excuse me, really quick second. My dog is being very annoying. Gage, be quiet. This dog is clearly being ridiculous right now, and he's whining about, put him in the room. Put him in the room, because then he's going to still keep whining there. He's already interrupting the line. My dog is going to hell, everybody. I'm just kidding. Gage. Excuse the interruptions. We did not have a technological issue, but my dog, hey, Gage, get inside there. Woo! All right, we're going on with this live. Talking about hell, y'all. Talking about hell. All right. Anyways, let's go into the actual Greek word of gnashing of teeth, because we actually see some insights. When you look into the particular phrase and the Greek word for gnashing, it's brogmos. And that word, a gnash, means a gnashing of teeth, used as a denote an extreme anguish and utter despair of men, co-signed to eternal punishment to hell. And interesting. Consigned to punishment to hell, snarling, growling in the sense of biting. So we see this, again, the snarling, the growling. When you think of an animal, a wild animal who is enraged, is anger, a snarl, that is the actual depictions of hell. Again, hell is a place that, at the very least, though it may not be a place where anyone wants to be, anyone there prefers hell and prefers life in hell than life with God. I remember contemplating about this more. I thought to myself, it actually makes sense. We resist God now for the 75 to 90 years we have on earth, average person. We loathe the idea of surrendering our lives to God. If we cannot give a mere 75 to 90 years to God, what makes us presume that God would torment us with the idea of us existing in eternal fellowship with him forever? If we can't fathom the idea, what a big ask surrendering to God. Oh my goodness. That's so hard. If we cannot give a mere 75 to 90, what makes us think God is going to say, hey, for all of eternity, you're going to be with me? God will give us our wishes. God will give us our wishes. The prayer of your heart will be answered. And if those prayers include a life that desires separation from God, God will grant you your wish, your prayer. He will answer your prayer. He will give it to you. Unfortunately, when you actually experience that prayer, it's not going to be what you like, but the reality is that you asked for it. And the reality also is anyone who is genuinely there wants to be there or would prefer to be there than to prefer to be with God. And so it's just some things to think about when it comes to this idea of hell. Another aspect and another element in terms of kind of more clarifying this particular perspective, is this something that people do? Well, yes, in terms of being okay with the agony of something, because it means that, you'd rather stay in your own ways and experience agony than stop the agony and just surrender. We see this specifically with agents who are trained by their governments, spies, where they are trained by their governments to be able to undergo some of the worst heinous torture. And even if their governments are the most heinous and evil and so on and so forth, instead of surrendering and telling the truth and stopping the agony, they would rather undergo all the agony and torture, and they will not surrender. They have been trained to do this, something that they have been molded to become. I want to propose to you, I want to propose to all of you watching this, that in fact, you are being molded. Whether you, and I'm being molded, my wife's being molded, my dog's being molded, I'm just kidding. My dog's being molded by the idea of eating food and being pet. That's probably what he's molded by. We are all being molded to some degree. We are all being molded by something, either God or sin. And the reality is, when we are allowing ourselves to be molded by sin, there is something that I believe, and this is something that maybe it's not talked about much, but I very much believe it to be the case, is that we begin to enter into what I call the immutability of pride, and or the immutability of sinfulness, human sinfulness. Now, what do I mean by the immutability of sinfulness? Can't God absolutely break into anybody? We've all heard these catchphrases that no matter how far you go or whatever it is, that God will chase you down or whatever. Actually, it's not true. There's plenty of verses that talk about the fact that there's the end of the mercy of God and the beginnings of the judgments and the wrath of God, and God will certainly give you up and certainly surrender if you just decide to be like, you know what? Like, I'm just going to do me. We see that in Pharaoh. It says that Pharaoh went, and mind you, I'm not a Calvinist, but when it goes on and it says that God had hardened his heart, just to clarify, because I'm actually not that Calvinist, that a lot of scholars believe that to be the passive allowing or the passive allowance of God to have Pharaoh experience the desires and also the consequences of the desires of his heart. And so, in other words, Pharaoh was going in one direction and God just decided to move his constraints. God was actually constraining Pharaoh from doing everything that he wanted to do and experiencing all of the consequences that he otherwise would have experienced. The wrath of God, or the hardening of his heart, in fact, is the God removing those constraints, saying, you know what, you're going in this direction. I've been providing messengers and doing what I can to have it to where you avoid that and don't experience that. I'm lifting the constraints now, and I will fully let you go exactly where you want to go. I will fully, it's like you going down a path and someone's blocking you and just kind of in front of you. And they're like a friend or someone who's like, you're trying to go past the door and they're just like blocking from the door. Nope, not getting through. It's like God doing that with Pharaoh and and us as humans and actually preventing us from going to a place that will fundamentally destroy us. He's like, no, I'm not letting you do that. Nope, you're not doing that because you're going to destroy yourself. Like, I promise you don't really want to do it. You really don't want to do this. And you really want to do this, and there's nothing I can do. I can show you all the signs, wonders. I can do all of the things. I can show that, your sorcerer, black magic stuff that Pharaoh had done. I will set like Pharaoh. He will, it's like Moses. He will perform signs, wonders, miracles, all this in particular judgments, and you will still not bow your knee. I will stop blocking the way. That's hardening of heart. That right there is the hardening of the heart of Pharaoh. God hardening his heart, i.e., God allowing him to experience the consequences. In other words, sin has a hardening. It's the sort of, if you think of concrete, the longer the concrete sits, the harder and harder and harder and harder and harder and harder, more cemented it becomes. And there's a cementing process of sinfulness and human depravity and pride And if we actually want to get a perfect example, even better than Pharaoh, we actually see it in Satan. Satan, a lot of people perceive as an angel, a cosmic figure who is against the world. And though he is a spirit who is like a lion roaming to and fro, seeking whom he shall devour. And he's cunning and clever and shrewd. But he is not merely a cosmic figure. I believe Satan is, in fact, the representative archetype of the malevolent potentiality of the human psyche. Simply put, he is your potential and my potential when fully surrendered to sin and ego. And we can become just like him. In this world, there's a duel going on. And the duel is dueling images. It is the image of God, and it is the image of a fallen being. He wants his image on you and me. And the more we willfully surrender ourselves over to sin, hence why Jesus said, repent, turn of your way, sin no more. Because Jesus understood the process of sin, that immutabilization, if so to speak, the immutability of sin, where it immortalizes, it becomes something that completely permeates the body, and now the body cannot be salvaged. You will die. It's like a cancer. Better to just move your arm because it's not spread. At a certain point, when you haven't dealt with the cancer, you're dead. You're done. Like, you're done. You're done. You're absolutely done. And so there's a concretization, a colonization of sin that sin is doing in the human body and in the human soul. And when we are not in the kenosis, the humility of Christ, where we are carrying the cross and our indignation is towards not God but sin, our wrath is not towards God but sin. When we are not redirecting our wrath towards sin and moving of our actions and our mentalities and our attitudes and desires of our heart, when we don't seek that and we are apathetic and we surrender ourselves over to sin, it colonizes the soul and the psyche, completely taking it over and making and constraining us to where we are entirely in perfected cooperation with sin. It is no longer a slave-master relationship. It is a friend-to-friend relationship where we become friends of sin, friends of the world. We become, in the same way in Christ, we become little Christs. We become representatives of Christ and images of Christ. We become little demons. We become little devils. In the same way Christian means little Christ, we become little demons in the aspect of not surrendering ourselves to God and instead surrendering ourselves over to the spirit of sin and evil. And that is what I believe happens from a psychological standpoint, that we actually begin to take on the psyche of hell. You know, the entrance into the abode of hell is simply the symptom of adopting and being possessed by the very psychological state of hell. And the psychological state of hell is one of a wrathful indignation towards God instead of a wrathful indignation towards sin. Had it in fact happened, Satan has the ability to stand in the presence of God, see God, behold God, see God in all of his glory, and yet still never bow in humble, contrite obedience towards God. How is he able to do that? The perfection of pride, the perfection of sin. And Satan, though being a cosmic figure, is the archetypal representation of the human psyche in the malevolent potential that we have if we discard God and abandon God and decide to live in the self, to live the life of the self, to abandon God and to become God. Fundamentally, Satan is not just what we experience and encounter, it's who we become. And so this is how this happens. And this is how we eventually come to a place where we can also see God and not be moved by God and not be transformed by God. This is also why the atheistic presumption and the presupposition is that, well, if God is good and God wanted us all saved, why doesn't he just like literally show himself right now? And the problem is that in the Gospels, that's, fundamentally the Gospels is the depiction of that. In John, it talks about that the light came to its own, that God came to his own, and yet they loved the darkness more than the light. Part of the revelation of the goodness of God is the deep depravity of human sinfulness in the fact that God can be seen, known, felt, and experienced, and yet still rejected. And I would propose to you that the better question is not how can a loving God send people to hell, but how can a loving God be so easily and adamantly and vehemently rejected by men? That is a better question, and the answer to that question gives us the answer to the first question of the quote unquote sending. And so, which is another thing that I want to address on this concept of hell, is we have a problem with a sender that God sends. Well, first and foremost, we don't necessarily get sent by God. We walk toward hell. Again, we have this idea that angels are pulling us into hell. We're walking into it. We're walking into it. Again, I truly believe that we are walking into it because this is a place of wrathful indignation. We see the capacity for human insanity. We don't think that, well, how could people really do this? Guys, this is very possible. We see it today. We see the fact that literally less than 100 years ago, quite literally a whole nation was okay with Jews being thrown in concentration camps. Stalin and the gulags. It's kind of a big deal. Mao Zedong. Even if people weren't directly thrown in concentration camps, there was a complicitness. I saw a Jew asked me for help, and I said nothing and did nothing and didn't invite them to their house to protect because I was preserving and I wanted to survive and all of this stuff. At the end of the day, that's a complicit nature, and that was a contribution to Nazi Germany and Hitler. Hitler thanks you for doing that. Mao Zedong thanks you for doing that. Stalin thanks us for doing these things. At the end of the day, we all feel this. We know that there is a depth to human insanity. We love movies that are apocalyptic. Some of the biggest, hugest movies that do box office numbers where they're apocalyptic, they're warlike. When we see, the government takes over and all of a sudden everything's under anarchy, and we see that there's like a remnant of a small chosen few who are light and moral and virtuous and courageous and willing to die. But then when we also recognize that majority of people, when the laws are removed, when you have, like the purge, when the laws are removed, what happens? The constraints on human nature are free. What happens? We don't find it that the movie is, everyone's peaceful and so sweet. We actually realize that no, most people are run by greed, lust, rage, and murder. And quite literally, it is just merely laws and laws alone that are constraining them from doing that are constraining them from sleeping with little children and raping and murdering and all of this particular stuff. And so we see that within movies. And I genuinely believe our interest and our love for those movies is actually a confirmation in the fact that we feel that actually this would be the case. People are kind of crazy, and realistically, if ish hits the fan, most people are gonna probably bombard your house and try to kill you for your food, and they won't care. And even though they had morals, quote unquote, they didn't really. They just had constraints. And this is also an interesting thing. Like, how could God be good people? We don't really know what good is. We don't know what good is, and our presumption of good is delusional because we don't know the motivations of people. We don't know what people really are until we see the pressure come down. We don't really know what people are. And I heard this one time, is that most people aren't actually good. Most people are just afraid of experiencing the consequences of the bad that they desire to do but can't do. I'll say that again. Most people are not good. Most people merely and simply and are constrained to do the bad and experiences the consequences of the bad that they desire to do but are too afraid to actually do it. That's the difference. That's the shift in paradigm. And it is a shift fundamentally in human nature, our perspective of human nature. And so hell is really complicated and hard and a tough pill to swallow when you have a Steven Pinker, better part of our angels, everyone's a sweet person, and so on and so forth. And I believe in the image of God in people, and I believe that 100%, and the Bible very much affirms that. But we must not be naive to the aspect of unredeemed, unsanctified human nature is very much dangerous and very much a hazard and very much destructive. And we've seen that within the rape of Nanking. We see that in Mao Zedong. We see that in the gulags and Stalin and Soviet Union. We see the complicit nature of Germans. We see it, guys, all throughout history. We see that in, America's history in terms of slavery and race. We see all of these things, and we recognize that the majority is actually, there's a madness to the majority. There's a madness to the majority that we don't want to accept, that we find to be a difficult pill to swallow. But the reality of the fact of the matter is that it's real. It's true. And so another aspect about two more things that I want to address about sending people to hell. Again, I think we walked there. But if we kind of go into this a little bit, want to do some, a little bit of some logic. Let's just say you go to Mexico. You go to a place in Mexico. You go to a place in Argentina. Well, Africa, doesn't matter. Purchase plane tickets. Go to a destination. Pilot takes you there, sends you there. All of a sudden, you realize you didn't really like the place that you went to. Is that the blame of the pilot that sent you to your destination? Or is it to blame specifically on your end that when you didn't do the due diligence of looking at the place that you had went to, you didn't do that due diligence. And because of that, now you are in Africa or Amsterdam or wherever the hell you are, and you don't like it, and you wish you had not gone there. Do we blame the pilot? Do we blame those who were flying the plane? Or do we recognize, no, it was a failure of the traveler to do the due diligence of research and the due diligence of study and educating themselves enough to be able to make an appropriate decision of the destination that they want and probably avoid the lack of joy in their travel experience from going to a place that they don't like? We would clearly, obviously say that it's the problem of the traveler. It's not the problem of the pilot. And I would venture to say that it's the same exact thing when it comes to God. God is a pilot. He is a pilot. God is a divine pilot that he will not enforce to anybody what they do not desire. Like I said, the wishes of your soul will be granted to you. If you wish to be separated from God, if you wish to be God, you will get that. Hell is the place of your throne and my throne. If we would like to be God without God, well, hell's our throne room. Hell's our throne room. And if that's what we wish, abandonment, we would like to abandon God, and we would like to be God ourselves, hell is what it looks like. Now, again, we can go on to all this stuff and go into all these things, which I won't go into now. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, God is the divine pilot who seeks peace. And if what you desire is separation from him, then he will do nothing else but give you exactly what you want. So that's number one. The other thing that I want to go into is this kind of argument that somehow the infinite eternality of hell is somehow illogical. But I would actually venture to say that it is very logical. And as a matter of fact, it's how our justice system is predicated right now and how things happen right now. And if we had something of infinite value, we probably would, in fact, have something where someone was eternally always in prison, based on the logic and of the structure of the systems that even current modern criminal justice system operates on. And what do I mean? All right. Let's just take the idea. You go and you damage a Honda Prius, right? Toyota Prius, or a Honda Corolla. I don't even know. It's maybe worth about 10 grand, $15,000 car. Okay, cool. The value of that car is going to be proportionate to the debt that is owed, right? What needs to be paid. If you can't pay it, you're going to do a certain time. So you owe 5 grand or 10 grand in damages. You pay that, or it might just be community service, or a month, 2 in jail. Cool. Now let's take it up a notch. Lamborghini. You or Bugatti. $2 million, $3 million car. All right. So let's just say now the damages of that you have done is not a $10,000 vehicle, but a $1 to $3 million vehicle. And now the damages are more around $500,000. Okay. Well, if the damage is now $500,000, you're looking at more around, instead of maybe a couple of days or a couple of weeks in jail, you're looking at probably a couple of years in jail, or a year or something like that. Year, 2 years, I don't know. I've never damaged a Bugatti, so I've never been to jail. So what you see is the proportion measure of the thing that is damaged. It impacts the time. We say the Bugatti's damaged and then the mansion's damaged. You go on and you steal a bunch of things from the mansion, millions of dollars worth of stuff. You get caught. Now you're looking at years. Now let's go on and say you go on and manslaughter. You don't intentionally try to kill somebody, but drinking and driving, you kill somebody. Okay, now you're not talking about 2-3 years. You're just stealing a couple of products. Now you're looking at 7 to 10 years, 12 years, depending on your state. Okay, got it. Now you're talking about intentional death and the death of multiple people. Okay, now you're looking at life to, sometimes they'll go on and say, double life or whatever. I don't know exactly, not double life, but they'll go on and, this person sentenced to 300, which obviously that person's going to be dead by then. The point is that, the equivalent amount of time, in proportion to what was done is XYZ. Okay. I think you get my gist. Fundamentally, the punishment and the consequences that are experienced within our understanding of justice and how our particular justice system. Now, obviously, this is a flawed system, not perfect, but I think it's good. It's good for what we have in terms of institutions. I think that we need, obviously, a justice system, and I think the best justice system that we have is what we have right now. It's clearly not perfect, but I think it's based on logic and rationality. I don't think it's now, like I said, there's a lot of other things. Like, I don't think someone should be, 10 years in prison for cannabis. But you get my point. Generally speaking, talking general, we're not getting into the logistics of like, well, there's people in jail for cannabis for 10 years. Like, okay, guy, like, let's not go into all the details and the technicalities. We understand that logically and the big picture, for the most part, the justice system, for the most part, should, at the very least, we know, should be predicated on the value of that which was destroyed and or damaged is going to influence and the very thing that is going to influence the sentencing. Okay. Well, then here's the question. How much is a Bugatti worth? How much is a human life worth? How much is God worth? Now, obviously, we can't put a worth on God because God is infinite. God upholds the very air you breathe. And so that's my point, is that if the proportion of a Bugatti or human life, the loss of human life, results in life, we have to ask ourselves, what is the value of God? What is the worth of God? Like, what is the measure of worth? And the answer would be, well, you cannot measure the worth of God and the value of God, because God is infinitely worthy and infinitely valuable. He's infinite. He literally is infinite before time. He is outside of time and he rules time. And he operates with, he encounters us within time, but he is overseeing and outside of time. And so fundamentally, God is the timeless, eternal Logos, the timeless one who fundamentally is infinite in value and worth. And so the question becomes, well, what are the damages? What is the result of the damage done to damage? We can't damage God, but for means of the analogy itself, damaging relationship with the infinite has infinite consequences. In the same way, damaging a particular vehicle that is highly expensive is very costly and expensive when it comes to the debt that is owed or the jail time that is needed. And so this is why there's an eternality to hell. The eternality of hell parallels the infinitude of God and the eternality of God. And when we understand the eternality of God, it only makes sense that hell has an eternality to it as well. Because God is so fundamentally infinite and eternal. He's infinite in value and worth, and therefore we as his creatures who owe surrender to him and submission to him, rebelliously and wickedly abandon him. That has infinite connotations. And that is not illogical. That is fundamentally in cohesion with the very logic that we apply today when it comes to the modern system of justice. And so I hope that this gave to you, I know there's a lot of things. There's the pre-knowledge of God. Well, if God knew, then why would he create a world? Why would he just create everything that it's perfect? There's a lot of things that we can go into. I know tough questions, but I hope this kind of shed some light on some tough questions. I hope this gave some perspective too. I know this is not going to be a suffice for everybody. I think there's going to be that person who's like, for whatever reason, they can't let go of the idea that, well, why didn't God make me smarter to accept him? Why couldn't God give me the logical capacity like you to XYZ? And I would fundamentally say that sort of questioning, and this is not to deflect, but this is to be honest, that sort of questioning is proving my point. The satanic ego, the accusatory, indignant satanic ego is in fact incarnate in that line of questioning, where we presume that somehow an infinite God wouldn't see all particular circumstances. You don't even understand how gravity or how honeybees operate, yet you presume within your line of questioning that somehow you have the capacity to create a particular world that's fundamentally more enriched and good when you don't even understand how gravity operates. That fundamentally is, in fact, evidence of the satanic egoism that exists, that is molding you and I into the immutable pride, which in fact is proving the point that I was making, that sin forms us, that sinfulness and pride form us to be a particular type of person that even if you see God and God give you all the evidence and answer all your questions for you, you will still resist him and hate him because you love your sin and you love your own way, and in fact, you would rather be God than him. Hence, Satan is not just a cosmic being. Satan is what you and I can be if we so choose to be. And so this is some tough stuff, but again, I hope it created a little bit of reasonableness and rationality. Again, if you like this video, please like and subscribe, share it with your friends, share it all around. Thank you guys so much for coming on the way to rise. Again, the shares and likes and the subscribes help a ton. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.